The most dangerous mistake a powerful man can make is believing no one in the room sees what he doesn't. The rain pressed softly against the tall glass windows of the private dining suite, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of silver and shadow, while inside, everything remained sharp, controlled, and perfectly timed. Daniel Carter didn't look at the storm. He never looked at anything he couldn't control. His attention rested on the document in front of him, a 52-page acquisition agreement that would decide the future of 3 companies before midnight. His Swiss watch ticked once against his wrist, 5 seconds behind schedule. He adjusted it without thinking. Around the table, men in tailored suits exchanged quiet laughter, their confidence polished, their voices low, each one believing they were part of a deal that would elevate them. Daniel already knew who would win. He always did. "Let's finalize this," he said, his tone even, almost bored, as if $200 million were just another Tuesday night decision. A pen slid across the table toward him. Smooth. Expected. Predictable. Across the room, unnoticed by everyone but the quiet rhythm of her own steps, Emily Brooks moved between tables with practiced ease. Black uniform. Hair tied back. No jewelry except a thin silver watch that looked older than it should have been. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply existed in the margins, where people like Daniel rarely looked. She approached the table at the exact moment the conversation peaked, when laughter rose just enough to cover the sound of porcelain meeting wood. A cup of coffee, set gently to Daniel's right. No interruption. No apology. Just precision. Then, she placed the check. Not in his hand. Not beside the pen, but directly on top of the final page of the contract. A small shift, barely noticeable, but deliberate. Daniel's eyes flicked down, irritation flashing for less than a second. "You're in the wrong place," he said without looking at her, his voice calm but edged with authority. Waitresses didn't interrupt decisions. That was the rule. Emily didn't respond. She didn't move either. Her gaze rested briefly on the paper, then lifted, not to challenge him, not to impress him, but simply to meet his eyes without lowering her own. It was the kind of look that didn't ask for permission. For a moment, something unfamiliar passed between them. Not tension, not defiance. Something quieter. Daniel's hand hovered above the pen. He could sign now. End it. Control it. That was the plan. But the check was still there. And on it, circled in neat, deliberate ink, was a number. Small. Ordinary. Easy to ignore. Except it wasn't. Because that number appeared again, buried deep in the contract's final clause. Daniel's fingers stilled. The room continued around him, unaware, voices blending into a low hum of confidence and assumption. He didn't look at Emily again. Not yet. Instead, he slowly lifted the check. And for the first time that night, he read the last page twice. Daniel Carter did not believe in coincidences, and he certainly did not believe in warnings delivered on restaurant paper. Yet his eyes returned to the number again, tracing it from the check to the final clause of the contract, where it sat quietly among dense legal language, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. And that was the problem, because he knew contracts. He had built an empire on seeing what others missed, and yet this line had slipped past him, hidden behind layers of acceptable phrasing and harmless structure. Until now. Until a waitress with no business being involved had circled it like it mattered, like it could change everything. His jaw tightened slightly as the room continued around him, one of the investors leaning forward with a confident smile, asking if everything looked good, another already raising his glass in anticipation, their voices smooth, practiced, unaware that the man at the center of the deal had stopped listening. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he flipped back one page, then another, following the trail of references that pointed back to the clause. And there it was, the delayed control provision, written in a way that would activate only after 90 days, transferring operational authority under specific conditions that seemed unlikely but not impossible. And that was enough, more than enough, because in his world, unlikely was just another word for planned. His fingers tapped once against the table, a subtle break in his usual stillness. "Is there a concern?" someone asked, their tone still polite, but edged now with curiosity. Daniel looked up slowly, his expression unreadable, the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable without understanding why. "This clause," he said, tapping the page lightly. "Who drafted it?" There was a pause, brief but real, the kind that did not belong in rooms like this. One of the attorneys cleared his throat, explaining it was a standard protective measure, nothing unusual, nothing that would affect control under normal circumstances. Daniel listened, but he did not accept it, because the number on the check was still in his mind, clean, deliberate, intentional. He shifted his gaze slightly, just enough to find Emily again. She had already stepped back, blending into the background as if she had never been part of the moment. But she was watching, not openly, not in a way that would draw attention, just enough to confirm that she knew exactly what she had done. Daniel closed the contract halfway, not fully rejecting it, not yet, but no longer moving forward either. The room felt it immediately. The energy shifted, confidence turning into calculation. "We will need a moment," he said, his voice calm, final, the kind of tone that ended conversations without raising volume. The others exchanged glances, subtle, controlled, but the certainty was gone now, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. Daniel stood, not abruptly, but with purpose, leaving the pen exactly where it was, untouched. As he stepped away from the table, his eyes never leaving Emily this time. "You," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that it carried. "Stay." She did not react immediately, did not rush forward or shrink back. She simply nodded once, as if being asked to stay by a man like him was neither surprising nor intimidating. And for the first time that evening, Daniel Carter felt something he did not expect. Not anger, not curiosity alone, but the distinct, undeniable awareness. That control, the thing he trusted most, had just shifted, and it had not come from a boardroom, a negotiation, or a rival. It had come from a woman carrying coffee, who had said nothing at all. The hallway outside the private dining suite was quieter, the storm now a distant echo behind thick walls. But Daniel Carter did not slow down until he reached the far end where the city lights stretched beneath them like a silent map of everything he owned and everything he intended to own. He stopped there, hands resting lightly against the polished wood railing, waiting, not turning, not calling her again, because he did not need to. He knew she would come, and she did, not hurried, not hesitant, just present, her steps measured, controlled, the same quiet precision that had unsettled him moments ago. She stopped a few feet behind him, close enough to speak, far enough to remain outside his space. "You circled that number," he said finally, his voice calm but sharper now, no longer the public tone he used at the table. This was private, direct. "Why?" Emily did not answer immediately, not out of fear, but because she chose when to speak, and that alone shifted something in the air. "Because it did not belong there," she said, her voice steady, soft, but not uncertain. Daniel turned then, slowly, studying her for the first time without distraction, without dismissal, as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood. "It is a standard clause," he replied, watching for hesitation, for weakness, for any sign that she had overstepped without understanding, but she did not look away. "It is written like one," she said, "but it is not structured like one." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. She continued before he could interrupt. "The trigger conditions are layered, not parallel, which means they do not need to happen together, just sequentially. And once they do, control shifts without requiring a new agreement." She paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle. "You would not lose it immediately, but you would not be able to take it back easily either." The words hung between them, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just precise. Daniel Carter did not return to the table immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle in the room behind him, because discomfort revealed more than confidence ever could. And when he finally stepped back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter was gone, replaced by polite stillness, the kind people used when they were no longer certain of their advantage. Daniel resumed his seat without a word, his gaze calm, controlled, but no longer passive. He picked up the contract again, flipping directly to the final pages as if the rest of the document no longer deserved his attention. "We will need to revisit this section," he said, his tone measured, giving nothing away. One of the attorneys leaned forward quickly, too quickly, offering reassurance that the clause was standard, that it had been used in previous agreements without issue. But Daniel did not look at him. Instead, he traced the structure again, line by line, seeing now what he had missed. Before, the sequencing, the conditional triggers, the quiet shift of authority disguised as protection, and more importantly, he began to see intent, not an accident, not a harmless oversight, but something designed. Standard does not mean harmless, Daniel said softly, and the room felt it, the subtle tightening of control returning, but not in the way they expected. This time it was not dominance, it was awareness, the kind that changed outcomes. Across the room, Emily moved again, clearing a nearby table, her presence still unobtrusive, still outside the conversation, yet somehow central to it. Daniel closed the document halfway and leaned back slightly, studying the faces around him, measuring reactions, the slight hesitation, the quick glances between partners, the almost invisible shift in posture from certainty to caution. He had seen this before too, just not from this side of the moment. Who benefits from this clause activating? He asked, not accusing, simply asking, but the question itself carried weight, because now it was not about legality, it was about intention. The response came slower this time, less polished, more careful. Someone explained it was a mutual safeguard, a way to ensure operational stability under unforeseen conditions. But Daniel already knew that answer, and it was not enough. Unforeseen does not mean unlikely, he replied, his voice still calm, but firmer now. And unlikely does not mean unplanned. The silence that followed was heavier, real, the kind that did not resolve itself with polite conversation. Daniel placed the pen down deliberately, not dramatically, just enough to signal a decision without announcing it. We will not be signing tonight, he said, and that was it. No explanation, no negotiation, just a shift in direction that no one in the room had anticipated. A few attempted to respond, to recover, to suggest revisions or alternatives, but Daniel was already standing, the conversation no longer his priority, because something else had taken its place. He glanced once toward Emily, just once, and this time there was no dismissal in it, only recognition, the kind given to someone who had altered the outcome without asking for credit. As he walked past her, he paused, not long enough to draw attention, but long enough for his voice to reach only her. You saw it before anyone else, he said quietly, not a question, not quite a statement, something in between. Emily did not turn to face him fully. She did not need to, no. She replied just as quietly, I just did not ignore it. Daniel considered that for a brief second, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before continuing on, leaving behind a room full of people who had just watched a deal collapse without understanding why, and a woman who returned to her work as if nothing had happened. Except now, the balance in the room had changed, and the only two people who truly understood it were the ones who had said the least. The rain had slowed by the time Daniel Carter stepped out of the restaurant. The city no longer blurred but sharpened under cold streetlights, each reflection clean, defined, almost surgical, like the decisions he usually made without hesitation. His driver opened the door of the black sedan without a word, but Daniel did not get in immediately. He stood there for a moment, looking back at the building, not at the entrance, but at the windows above, where everything had just shifted in a way he had not planned, not controlled, and yet could not ignore. Inside, Emily Brooks finished clearing the last of the tableware, her movements unchanged, steady, efficient, as if the collapse of a $200 million deal had no weight in her world. But it did, just not in the way people would expect. She carried the empty cups to the service station, placing them down with quiet precision, her mind already moving past the moment, because moments like that were not new to her. Only the outcome had changed. She reached into her apron briefly, touching the edge of a folded piece of paper she kept hidden, not taking it out, just confirming it was still there, still real, a habit she never broke. Across the room, her manager approached, confusion written across his face, asking what had happened, why the table had cleared so suddenly. Emily gave a simple answer. They changed their mind. Nothing more. Because anything more would invite questions she did not intend to answer. Outside, Daniel finally slid into the car, the door closing with a soft, controlled sound, sealing him into a space where silence was expected. But tonight, silence did not feel like control. It felt like interruption. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages from his legal team, from partners, from people who needed clarity, who needed direction, who expected him to have already calculated the next move. He did not respond. Not yet. Instead, he replayed the moment in his mind. Not the conversation at the table, but the smaller details, the placement of the check, the circled number, the way she had not explained herself unless asked, the way she had not tried to impress him. And that was what stayed with him. Not what she said, but what she did not say, because in his world, everyone explained, everyone justified, everyone tried to prove their value. But she had not. She had simply pointed, and that had been enough. "Take me back," he said suddenly, his voice calm but decisive. The driver hesitated for less than a second, then nodded, turning the car smoothly back toward the restaurant. Inside, Emily was already preparing to leave, her shift nearly over, the quiet rhythm of the night settling into its final hour. She removed her apron, folding it neatly, placing it where it belonged. Just another routine, just another ending. Except tonight did not end the way most nights did, because just as she reached for her coat, the front door opened again, and the cold air followed someone back inside. She did not turn immediately. She did not need to. There were footsteps that carried intention, and she recognized that kind of movement, the kind that did not belong to customers anymore, the kind that belonged to someone who had come back for a reason. Daniel Carter stopped a few feet away from her, not speaking right away, not interrupting her movement, just standing there, waiting, not as a CEO expecting attention, but as a man choosing not to rush the moment. Emily finished what she was doing, then turned to face him, her expression the same as before, calm, unreadable. "You came back," she said, not surprised, not impressed, just stating what was obvious. Daniel nodded once, his gaze steady. "I do not leave questions unanswered," he replied, and for the first time that night, the distance between them did not feel like status. It felt like something else entirely, something closer to understanding. Daniel Carter held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, not to intimidate, but to understand, because something about Emily Brooks did not align with the world he operated in, and that alone made her impossible to ignore. "Then ask," she said quietly, adjusting her coat as if this conversation was no more significant than the end of a shift. Daniel exhaled slowly, choosing his words with the same precision he applied to contracts. "You said you have seen something like that clause before," he began, his tone even, controlled. "That is not knowledge most people pick up serving tables." Emily did not respond immediately, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter, still, composed. "Most people do not look for it," she replied, her voice steady. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion now, but in focus. "That is not an answer," he said again. Quieter this time, less like a demand, more like a recognition that she was choosing what to reveal. Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him the way he had studied her earlier, measuring, not his power, but his intent. "You stopped the deal," she said instead, redirecting the moment with calm precision. "That is what matters." Daniel did not move. "It matters why," he replied, and there it was, not control, not authority, but something closer to curiosity, something he rarely allowed to surface. Emily reached into her coat pocket then, slowly, deliberately, not hiding the movement, not dramatizing it either, and pulled out a folded document, worn at the edges, used more than once. She placed it on the counter between them, not sliding it toward him, just setting it there, and offering without insistence. Daniel looked down at it, then back at her, waiting. Emily nodded once, giving permission without saying it. Daniel unfolded the paper carefully, his movements precise, controlled, and as his eyes scanned the contents, something shifted, not visibly at first, but internally, the kind of shift that did not show in posture, but in silence. The document was older, dated years back, but the structure was familiar, unmistakably so. The same layered conditions, the same delayed transfer of control, the same quiet trap hidden beneath acceptable language. But this one was signed, completed, executed. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This was yours," he said, not asking. Emily did not look away. "It was my father's company," she corrected softly, and that single sentence carried more weight than anything she had said before. Daniel looked back down at the document, reading more carefully now, not as a businessman, but as someone tracing the aftermath of a decision, the signatures, the dates, the clauses that had once looked harmless until they were not. He lost it. Daniel said, his voice lower now, not detached anymore. Emily nodded once. Not immediately, she replied, echoing her earlier words, but slowly, exactly the way it was written. The room around them was quiet, the late hour leaving only distant sounds of staff finishing their work, but present. There was nothing after, she said finally, her voice calm, almost detached. That was the point. Daniel absorbed that. The simplicity of it, the finality, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true. And in that truth he understood something he had not considered before. That loss did not always arrive as a moment. Sometimes it unfolded exactly as it was written, line by line, until there was nothing left to argue. And you stayed, he said quietly. Emily gave the smallest nod. Someone had to understand what happened, she replied. And again, no bitterness, no attempt to assign blame. Just a statement that carried weight without needing to explain itself. Daniel looked at her differently now, not because of what she had lost, but because of what she had chosen to become after it. Not loud, not visible, but precise, aware, the kind of awareness that came from paying attention when others turned away. He took a step closer, not invading her space, but no longer standing apart either. You could be doing something else, he said, not as a judgment, but as a recognition. Emily almost smiled, not in amusement, but in understanding. I am, she said, and that was it. No elaboration, no need to justify a path that did not need validation. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something between acceptance and realization, the kind that did not come from winning, but from seeing clearly. Most people would have used that moment differently, he said, referring not to the past, but to tonight, to the contract, to the opportunity she had to insert herself into a world that rewarded visibility. Emily's eyes remained steady. Most people need to be seen, she replied. I needed to be sure. The distinction was subtle, but absolute, and Daniel understood it instantly, because in his world, being seen was often mistaken for being right. And tonight, that assumption had nearly cost him something far more valuable than money. The silence between them returned, but it was no longer uncertain. It was settled, grounded in something neither of them needed to define. Daniel glanced briefly toward the empty dining room. The table now cleared, the deal already fading into something that would be rewritten, renegotiated, or abandoned entirely. But that was no longer the focus. I will have my team review every line again, he said, more to himself than to her, then paused, looking back at her. But they will not see what you saw. Emily did not respond to that, because she did not need to. Some truths did not require agreement, only recognition. Daniel nodded once, a small, deliberate acknowledgement, not of her role, but of her presence, of the fact that she had altered something without asking to be part of it, and that mattered more than anything he could quantify. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a card, simple, understated, placing it on the counter where the check had been earlier, mirroring the same quiet gesture that had changed his decision. If you ever decide you want to use that understanding differently, he said, his voice calm, without pressure, without expectation, call me. Emily looked at the card, then back at him, not reaching for it. Immediately, not dismissing it either, just acknowledging it existed, just like the moment they had shared, and for a brief second, neither of them moved, because both understood something had shifted, not in position, not in power, but in perspective, and that was harder to undo than any contract. Emily Brooks did not reach for the card right away, and that alone made the moment linger longer than Daniel Carter expected, not because he needed her answer, but because he was not used to offering something without seeing it accepted, rejected, or negotiated. Instead, she simply looked at it, as if it were just another object placed on a surface, no different from the check she had used earlier, no different from the countless items she handled every night. But Daniel knew it was not the same. And so did she. Eventually she picked it up, not with urgency, not with hesitation, just a simple motion, her fingers brushing the edge before turning it over once, reading the name without reacting to it, without acknowledging the weight it carried in most rooms. Then she slipped it into her coat pocket beside the folded document, placing it next to something that had already shaped her understanding of the world. And that choice, quiet and deliberate, said more than any words could have. Daniel noticed it. Of course he did. He noticed everything now. The way she grouped meaning, not by status, but by relevance, and for the first time in a long time, he did not try to interpret it immediately. He allowed it to exist without control. "You do not seem impressed," he said after a moment, not offended. "Just observing." Emily adjusted her coat again, preparing to leave. "I am not supposed to be," she replied, her tone calm, not dismissive, just grounded in something he could not influence. Daniel almost smiled at that, not because it amused him, but because it confirmed something he had already begun to understand, that whatever space she occupied, it was not defined by people like him, and that made it real in a way he rarely encountered. Most people would be, he said, not as a challenge, but as a fact he had seen proven countless times. Emily met his gaze one last time, steady, unshaken. "Most people are waiting for permission to matter," she said softly. "I already know when I do." The words settled between them, quiet, but undeniable, and Daniel did not argue them, because there was nothing to argue, only something to recognize. He nodded once, slower this time, less like acknowledgement, more like acceptance. "Then I will not assume you will call," he said. And this time there was no expectation behind it, just clarity. Emily gave a small nod in return. Not agreement, not refusal, just acknowledgement. And then she moved past him, her steps light, unhurried, heading toward the door as if this night was ending like any other. But it was not for him. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, watching as she left, the door opening briefly, letting in the cold air before closing again, sealing the quiet behind her. He stood there, not thinking about the deal, not about the partners waiting for answers, but about something far less measurable, the realization that control had not been taken from him. It had simply never been as complete as he believed. And tonight, someone had shown him that without raising her voice, without asking for anything in return, without even stepping into his world, she had shifted it. And that was something he could not ignore, not because it challenged him, but because it corrected him. Daniel finally turned, walking toward the exit once more, his phone already lighting up with the demands of his world. But his mind was elsewhere, not distracted, just recalibrated, because for the first time in years, the most important decision of his night had not been the one written in a contract. It had been the one he chose not to sign, and the person who made that possible had already disappeared back into a life that did not need his recognition to remain significant. The city felt different the next morning, not because anything had changed on the surface, but because Daniel Carter saw it differently. The glass towers still stood in perfect symmetry, the traffic still moved with calculated impatience, and his office still waited on the 42nd floor with the same quiet authority it always held. But something inside that structure had shifted, something subtle, something he could not delegate. He stood by the window, reviewing the revised contract on his tablet. His legal team had worked through the night, rewriting clauses, removing ambiguities, strengthening control, every line now sharper, clearer, safer, and yet his attention did not stay on the document for long, because the memory of a circled number on a simple receipt carried more weight than all 52 pages in front of him. "Everything has been corrected," his lead attorney said, standing across the desk, confident, composed, waiting for approval. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging the effort, but not immediately responding, because he understood now that correction was not just about what was written, it was about what was seen, and more importantly, what was not ignored. He set the tablet down, fingers resting lightly against the glass surface of his desk, reflecting the skyline behind him. "We will proceed," he said finally, his tone calm, but measured, but not with them. The attorney paused, surprised. The deal had been salvaged, improved, secured. Walking away was no longer necessary, at least not by traditional logic. "May I ask why?" he said carefully. Daniel turned slightly, looking out over the city again. "Because they wrote it that way once," he replied, and that was enough. Not an accusation, not a debate, just a decision rooted in something deeper than terms and conditions. The attorney nodded slowly, understanding that some judgments did not require explanation, only trust. Hours later, the office returned to its usual rhythm, calls, meetings, strategies unfolding with precision. But Daniel's mind moved differently through it all, not slower, not distracted, just more aware, and awareness changed everything. Across the city, in a quieter part of town, Emily Brooks stepped into the small cafe where she spent her mornings, the same place she had gone to for years, the same corner table waiting, sunlight filtering through the window in soft lines. She sat down, placing her coat beside her, reaching into the pocket where the folded document rested, her fingers brushing it. Briefly before pulling out the card instead, she looked at it again, not with curiosity, not with ambition, but with the same calm consideration she applied to everything. A name, a number, an opportunity, none of it unfamiliar, none of it necessary. She set the card on the table, beside her coffee, letting it sit there without decision, without urgency, because for her, timing was not about opportunity. It was about alignment, and she had learned that the hard way, through loss that did not arrive all at once, but line by line, choice by choice. Back in his office, Daniel picked up his phone, scrolling through a list of contacts, pausing briefly, then moving past them, because the number he was thinking about was not saved, not stored, not something he could access with a single touch. And that, for the first time, felt intentional, not inconvenient. He leaned back slightly, allowing a rare moment of stillness to settle in. Not the absence of action, but the presence of clarity. He had built his world on control, on precision, on knowing exactly when and how to act. But yesterday had shown him something different, something quieter. That control was not always about making the final decision. Sometimes it was about recognizing the moment when not to. And somewhere across the city, a woman who had never asked to be part of his world had reminded him of that. Not with force, not with ambition, but with a single choice to speak when it mattered, and to remain silent when it did not. And that was something no contract could define, no negotiation could secure. It simply existed, waiting for those who were willing to see it. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Carter did not feel the need to control that realization. He simply accepted it.